You think you understand power until the moment it turns against you. The Korean Mafia boss leaned across the counter and spoke a rare dialect he believed no one in this city could understand. He thought the black shopkeeper standing before him would stay silent, confused, powerless. But the moment she answered in the same dialect, calm and steady, the entire room seemed to freeze. The shop had been quiet only seconds earlier. Shelves of tea, rice, and dried herbs filled the air with warm, earthy scents that clung softly to the small store-like memory itself. Outside, the afternoon street carried its usual rhythm of footsteps and passing cars. But inside, something darker had arrived. The tall man standing at the counter carried the kind of presence that made people step aside without being told. His black coat was simple but expensive, his posture straight, his eyes cold with the quiet certainty of someone used to being obeyed. Everyone in that neighborhood knew who he was, even if they rarely spoke his name aloud. Kong Min-jae, a man whispered about in late-night conversations and nervous glances, a man whose influence moved through the city like a shadow. He leaned toward the counter, his voice low and sharp as he spoke in a dialect from a remote Korean mountain region. One few people outside those villages could recognize. It was not a greeting, it was a threat disguised as conversation. The customers standing nearby lowered their eyes, pretending to examine jars of honey or bags of rice. No one expected the woman behind the counter to respond. She was simply the shopkeeper, just another small business owner trying to survive in a hard city. But when she lifted her eyes and answered him in that same dialect, every person in that room felt the air tighten like a held breath. Amina Johnson had owned the little shop for almost 9 years, though most people walking past the faded green door never knew the story behind her quiet smile. To the neighborhood, she was simply the woman who always remembered a customer's favorite tea or slipped an extra apple into a child's bag when their parent looked tired. But her life had traveled through far more places than those narrow streets suggested. Years earlier, she had served as a language specialist attached to humanitarian missions across several countries. She had spent long months in rural villages where electricity flickered and mountain winds carried the smell of pine and smoke through narrow valleys. In one small Korean village tucked deep among steep hills, she had lived for nearly a year, helping aid workers communicate with elders who spoke a dialect so rare it rarely appeared in textbooks. The villagers had welcomed her slowly, teaching her not just words but the rhythm behind them, the small changes in tone that turned meaning from respect to insult. She had eaten rice beside wood stoves, listened to old songs, and learned that language carried history like roots under soil. Those memories lived quietly inside her long after she returned home and opened her shop. She rarely spoke about them. She did not need to. Her life now was simple, or at least it had been until that afternoon when Kong Min-jae stepped through her door. Kong had not come to buy tea. Men like him rarely entered places without purpose. His organization had been expanding quietly through small businesses across the district, offering what they called protection. In truth, it was a demand dressed in polite words. Pay the monthly fee, and problems disappeared. Refuse, and problems multiplied in ways that were difficult to trace. Most shop owners paid quickly. Fear made decisions easy. But Amina had listened calmly when his representative first visited weeks earlier, and she had given the same answer each time. She would not pay for something she did not ask for. That refusal had reached Kang himself. Now he stood inside her shop, speaking in a dialect he believed no one else understood, telling her in careful, controlled words that stubborn people often regretted their choices. The customers standing nearby felt the weight of those words even without understanding them. Silence spread across the store. The refrigerator hummed softly. A jar lid clicked as someone nervously tightened it. Kong's eyes watched her closely, expecting confusion or fear. Instead, Amina answered him calmly in the same dialect, explaining that threats spoken in hidden language were still threats, and that mountains had taught her something about patience. His expression changed for the first time since entering the store. Not anger yet, something closer to surprise. Powerful men are used to control. Kang had spent years building a network that stretched through ports, warehouses, and quiet offices above crowded streets. His power did not rely on shouting, it relied on certainty. People obeyed because they believed resistance was useless. But the woman before him did not fit the pattern he knew. She spoke the dialect with calm accuracy, each tone placed exactly where it belonged. She understood every word he had intended to keep secret. The realization moved through his mind like a crack through ice. Around them, the bystanders sensed the tension, though they still did not understand the language itself. One elderly man who visited the shop every morning stood frozen near the door, clutching a bag of oranges. A young delivery driver lingered beside a shelf of noodles, pretending to check a receipt while watching the exchange from the corner of his eye. Kong spoke again, his voice colder now, telling her that courage often faded when consequences arrived. Amina listened without interrupting. She rested her hands gently on the wooden counter that had grown smooth after years of use. Her answer came slowly but firmly. She said that true strength did not come from making others afraid. It came from standing steady when fear arrived at your own door. The words carried quiet weight, even for those who could not understand the dialect. They felt the steadiness behind her voice. Something subtle shifted in the room. The delivery driver moved slightly closer to the counter, as if ready to speak if things turned worse. The elderly man straightened his shoulders. Outside, 2 more customers paused near the door, sensing tension through the glass. Kong noticed the change immediately. Influence often depended on silence from witnesses, but silence was beginning to thin. Still, he tried one last time to assert control. His voice dropped even lower as he reminded her of the many ways a small shop could disappear from a neighborhood. Fires started by accident, inspections that closed doors for months, supplies that never arrived. He expected her resolve to break under the weight of possibilities. Instead, Amina leaned forward slightly, meeting his gaze with calm clarity. She answered in the same dialect that mountains had taught her patience and oceans had taught her courage. She told him that fear only works when people believe they stand alone. In that moment, something else happened that Kong did not expect. The elderly man near the door stepped forward beside her counter. The delivery driver set his receipt down and moved closer as well. One by one, the customers who had remained silent earlier gathered quietly nearby. None of them understood the dialect, yet they understood the moment. Kang looked around the room and saw something rare. Not anger, not violence. Something stronger. Quiet unity. The kind that does not shout but refuses to move. For a long moment he said nothing. Power built on intimidation depends on the belief that everyone else will stay silent. But silence had already begun to change sides. Amina spoke once more in the dialect he had tried to use as a weapon. Her voice carried steady calm as she told him that real honor never grows from fear. It grows from respect, freely given. She reminded him that strength measured only by control is the weakest kind of strength there is. The words landed with the quiet weight of truth. Kong's eyes studied the room again, measuring something invisible but undeniable. The crowd around the counter had grown. Not one person looked away now. For the first time that afternoon, Kong Min-jae stepped back from the counter. He straightened his coat slowly, his face unreadable, and turned toward the door. No argument followed. No threats remained. Sometimes the most powerful defeat arrives without a single raised voice. When the door finally closed behind him, the tension dissolved like ice melting under sunlight. Amina exhaled slowly, her hands still resting on the counter. The elderly man placed his bag of oranges beside the register with a gentle smile. The delivery driver nodded with quiet respect. No one applauded. No one shouted. Yet the room carried a powerful sense of shared understanding. Courage does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it stands quietly behind a counter in a small shop, speaking calm words in a language no one expected. And sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to bow when fear walks through the door. Stories like this remind us that strength often hides in the most ordinary places. If this story moved you, share where you are watching from and tell us what quiet courage means to you. And if you believe the world needs more stories about silent strength and unseen heroes, make sure to subscribe for more stories that remind us how powerful dignity can be.